So, comments, questions, add-ons?
I have a question for Judy and a question for Joe. For Judy, I'm wondering, you did a large section on, or a section on symbolic language amongst non-humans. I'm curious if you've done any research on Kanzi the bonobo and his son Heko, who I came across when I was actually researching this about 6 months ago, has been tentatively diagnosed with autism by certain primate researchers. I was wondering if you had research that or had any thoughts on that.
I have not, but it's something I'd very much like to do. So.
Then you and I should talk about this.
Yeah, let's talk.
For Joe, I have a question on, you say that we should engage in coalition politics to try to get our message across, and you say that we should be able to have like alliances with groups like PETA, right? My question is, where is the bright line for when a group should be, is it a viable partner for coalition for our goals, and when is a group not a viable partner? I'll highlight two examples that I think fall directly into this discussion. First, Autism Speaks is a very famous organization that helps to raise awareness about autism in the greater community, while also advocating outright for curing autism and for having genetic control manipulation of children so as to prevent autism in the future. Is that group a viable partner for coalition? And secondly, with, for instance, Temple Grandin, who does a lot of work about autism and also does a lot of work about animal welfare, I think that she genuinely is committed to the question of animal welfare inside the slaughterhouse. But she still designs and builds the fast, efficient, productive slaughterhouses that slaughter billions of animals a year. Is she a viable partner for our coalition, or can we say, because you actively engage in murdering animals, you have to be kicked out?
My answer, which may not make friends, is yes, they are both viable avenues of coalition, even though both have a long way to go in order to be able to reach politics that I think is correct. So in the instance of Autism Speaks, where they're advocating for cures to autism and where they're advocating for genetic modification and things like that in order to be able to solve issues of autism, those are things that need to be problematized when we build these coalitions. However, being able to spawn awareness about autism in order to be able to bring it into the mainstream, in order to be able to have these conversations, allows us the ability to bring our criticisms of Autism Speaks to both that group as well as to the community at large. Now, there is a risk that because Autism Speaks is a bigger organization with a lot of money, right, that's a risk by forming a coalition with PETA, is that they can drown out the criticism with just the wealth that they have. It doesn't mean that we should shut them out entirely from the conversations, but take what they do and utilize it productively in ways that we think that we can harness it and criticize them in those elements that don't. As for Temple Grandin, right, welfarism is problematic, but, for those individuals who are being slaughtered in the slaughterhouses, they are now at least being slaughtered a little bit more humanely, right? And so, while I don't really advocate the conscientious rapist type of thing, it's like, well, it's okay because it's more humane, I do think that by pointing out how welfarism can be linked with more radical forms of politics, that we could criticize these movements that are like, we make slaughterhouses more humane, and not utilize that as the end point of our movement, versus labeling her as just an enemy that we have to turn away from in its entirety, which does not mean the same thing as not attacking her for the things that she does that's problematic.
So I guess this goes back to the initial stage of my question. Can you give us a bright line as to who does not belong in coalition politics? Can you show us an example of this is someone with whom we cannot work?
I think that there is no definitive answer or bright line that should be made to say that there are individuals who should be kept out in its entirety. That does not mean that I want to personally work with every individual that exists there, but it also means that if I want to be able to change the individuals I disagree with, I think the best way to be able to change those individuals is not by just labeling them as an enemy that I refuse to work with, but talking with those individuals and figuring out those strands and commonalities that we can work to in order to be able to change, the avenues that take place. So, say the KKK, right? I'm obviously not a KKK supporter. I do not think that they should exist. But if I encounter a KKK member who's like, well, racism is good because it's the only way that we can ensure a productive discussion instead of, of communities and things like that, I can utilize that individual's desire for community and be able to talk about the way that racism breaks down community. Will I be able to convince that individual that racism is bad? Probably not. But that individual is not a singular or universal person. You know, there's not one thing that defines them. They're defined by a lot of other things. So while they might never be able to give up vestiges of racism, they may, in the process of conversations of being part of the coalition, give up vestiges of sexism, homophobia, speciesism, or whatever else. They might not. But to say that anyone who exists in a problematic movement cannot be a part of my movement is only a way of shutting down discussion and preventing a larger form of awareness from being able to spiral out. So, am I scared of insiders undermining my own movement? Without a doubt. But I am more scared of not allowing potential allies into my movement than I am from letting a couple of insiders get in as well.
Also, I'll refer you back to an article that Robin mentioned yesterday. It's called Unspeakable Conversations by Harriet McBride Johnson, in which she speaks with Peter Singer and decides whether or not she should actually even touch him in order to shake hands. Should she have dinner with him? Is that breaking bread with the enemy? So it's very interesting and related to what you're talking about.
Robin has a
Yeah,
comment.
I have a comment and a question. Sherry Brown is the director of the National Coalition Building Institute. She defines a coalition as what you agree on. And that's a very good working definition. And I've been to her workshops and I've seen people who, from different constituencies who are like pretty confirmed, say for example that, gay is a sin or something like that, within a weekend transform and, to the next step to say, well, it's God's business, we're close now, we're buddies. And so you have to make contact if you want to move forward in any kind of progressive agenda. The question I have for Joe is, what you said just struck me as, I hate to use the word common sense, it's like, but you labeled it a queering approach. And I want to know what makes what you said about letting people have their process and supporting people in their process and making space for people to have their process. What makes that queer?
Well, to me, queerness is breaking down boundaries and divisions between things, whether it be between sexuality, male, female, right, wrong, those sort of things. And so the process of queering is that, well, to me, also, it's a little bit, I think building coalitions makes sense. A lot of people think that if you just don't get it right and you're not pure enough, you can't be a part of these coalitions. And that was one of the things that I wasn't aware of when I just had a very militant vegan, advocacy behind me, is that I wasn't accepting various different forms of differences that then existed. And so to me, allowing for coalitions, even with people you don't agree with, allows for a line to sort of like waver and be able to move back and forth. That doesn't say that there is a straight, single way to approach it, but is one that comes from the diversity of tactics simultaneously. And one of the things that I get to later in the paper that I didn't really get into here is that the reason why the intersection between queerness and vegetarianism is so important is because it reminds us that the way that humans approach sexuality is a lot different than the way the non-human world approaches sexuality. Like for us to assume that there is male and female and that's it, there's only one form of sexuality, ignores the diversity of species that change their sex repeatedly throughout their lifetime, or have both sex organs simultaneously and utilize them simultaneously like a bunch of sea urchins do. And these are different ways that by interlinking animal forms of struggles with human sexual forms of struggles allow for us to be able to have that dialogue that then, allows us to queer the way that we approach these forms of politics.
I'm not sure if I have a question in here, but just more or less a comment, because I'm coming more from the activist perspective, but as a philosophy student, I a little bit in the academic arena, but I'm trying to really objectively look at